Okay, shall we make a start? So first of all, thanks very much for coming along. I know how busy you all are, doing lots of other different things, lots of pulls on your time, so I appreciate you giving up some of your time tonight. Anna and I are going to be talking for about 30 minutes or so, and then there's a big sort of Q&A at the end. So at any stage, if you want to ask a question, then ask it, or if you want to save it up until the end, it's entirely up to you. And we hope to have a pretty good debate at the end, which is good. Okay, so a little bit of an introduction to me and to the series of talks. So I'm old. I have got to the end of my career, 35 years as an MEP consulting engineer, and latterly a senior leader of the MEP firm that I was working for. And it's funny, when you get to the end of your career, you begin to realise that you might have got a bit of wisdom that's been built up along the miles that you put in through your career. And one of the things that struck me when I retired is that there's quite a lot of wisdom in my mind that I think would help you as newcomers to the industry be as effective as quickly as you possibly can. So, and of course, it's not just my wisdom. There's many better people in the world than me, but I know quite a lot of people who, like Anna, architect, stroke engineer, who have got other bits of wisdom as well. So for me, the struggle was, how do you sort of harness all of that wisdom, and how do you find a vehicle to actually inject some of that back into your brains? Because that's what we want to do. That's what the whole thing is all about. And I should say I'm a visiting professor at UCL, and I have been for the last 8 years. So I'm sort of quite invested personally in making UCL as successful as they can be, and of course the students that come out of it as well. Come on in, everybody. Good to see some latecomers. Come on in. Grab a seat wherever you can.
Sit at the front. That's your
We've only just started. You haven't missed anything yet. Okay, so what we've done is we've pulled together a series of talks, 5 of them, which are all sort of on a weekly basis, deliberately timed to be at the start of your academic year, so that you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and keen to come along. So Joe and I have done our talks already. Those are available online, I think. They will be available online soon. So alongside Anna, and I'll introduce Anna in a minute, we've also got Ruth, who's a lighting director at Hawley, who's talking next week. And then finally, an old friend of mine, Matt Jones, who is a senior leader at Hawley, who has probably got more radical thinking about the way the industry needs to shape itself going into the future than anybody else I know. So if you can come along to the other two as well, that would be very helpful. And the idea really is about passing on some wisdom. But we also want to let you know that about what the built environment industry is like, and I'm sure Anna will say the same, but the 35 years that I had in this industry were absolutely fantastic. I can safely say I enjoyed every day that I came to work, which is great. But it's about, to me, it's about making you effective, and by that I mean it's and again, a lot of the talks are quite subtle, so I would urge you to sort of dial in. So what I mean by that is, you go through your university degree and you get told what to do, and then you become effective at honing that skill so that you definitely know what to do. The issue is applying that. And there are loads of reasons why, things that will get in the way of that being applied. But you have to try and find a way around that, because what we need, what the country, what the planet needs you to be, is as effective at putting your skill set actually into action. And that is a lot of that you pick up through wisdom along your career, but how can we short circuit that process to make you as effective as possible, as early as possible. So that's really the whole sort of nub of the talk. So a little bit about Anna. So I've known Anna for 20 years ish, probably a little bit longer than that. We worked together on a project in Oxford way back in 2006. Anna at that time was an architect working for a large architectural practice, Wilkinson in London. And recently Anna has transitioned from architecture into engineering, which I'm sure she's going to talk to you about that. But what I like about Anna is Anna's seen the whole sustainability journey from start to finish in a way, in as much as 30 years ago when she joined the industry, sustainability was a niche thing over in the corner. And during her career, she's sort of gone from a niche to being slightly more mainstream to now being more or less front and centre to everything that happens in a project. And I hope Anna's also got a bit of a view about what that might, what the future might offer there. And I do think that Anna's got a pretty deep understanding of how buildings are put together. And buildings are complex. Lots of complex moving parts in a building. And she's also passionate about doing the right thing. So she's got some sort of sidelined issues of sort of social responsibility stuff, which I'm sure she'll be talking about. She's also very carbon aware, which is a relatively new thing. And I do think she's got some significant wisdom that is relevant directly to you. And that is the key thing. So as I say, questions at any stage or questions at the end. One thing I'd like to ask you, which would be interesting to see what the answer is, hands up those who are thinking about following a career in the built environment when they finish their degree course. Excellent. That was jolly the right answer. So I've set everything up for Anna to take over. Brilliant. Well done, Anna.
Great. Okay, hello everyone. So I'm going to kind of canter through a bit of my career and what that means really to the story of sustainability, as Ian said, and then kind of sprinkling the thoughts on change and how we affect change. Now, this absolutely disgusting building is where I started my career. Wow. So it was 1993, and trust me, there were no jobs in the UK. It was a big recession here, so we all went abroad. And I went to Sri Lanka, and I worked for an architect that actually inhabited the top of this building because they had designed it. Anyway, I think what I can say about Sri Lanka, first of all, it's a flipping amazing place and I had a great time. But in terms of the sustainability journey, actually quite interesting because Sri Lanka at the time was undergoing a lot of change. They were emerging as a country. And the way they built was incredibly sustainable because they didn't have products. They didn't have manufactured goods. They made stuff on site. Very short supply chains, massively high quality trades, craftspeople. So it's actually, when you look back, it's like, but they didn't want that. They wanted our products, our Western construction. I was there when they got their first pizzeria. And, it's kind of quite an interesting story. They got the pizzeria in Colombo. And then they all went there, all the young, trendy people went there. And they're like, this is absolutely disgusting. So they put on loads of chilies to make it edible. And I think that was quite symbolic of where they were. Then I went to Holland to do the other half. And this actually was a scheme, but mainly I worked on very kind of modern buildings. I think really interesting approach to sustainability in Holland. You'd say, well, I'm really interested in designing buildings with very low carbon. And this was 1993. People didn't do a lot of this. And they went, well, why on earth wouldn't you? Like, OVs. And so that's really interesting because it was totally pragmatic. They're just really sensible. So the sustainability element came through absolute pragmatism. Then I kind of finished my training in Manchester and did worked in London. And then kind of went to Wilkinson for 14 years. And so I really, really learned how to build things. I just worked on tons of projects that actually did get built, which isn't always the way. You quite often get stuck on projects and planning and, whatever. Finsbury Park, Further Education College, lots of schools. And then I got into a lot of repurposing old buildings. So this was in Southampton Sea City, it's a museum that we put into the old magistrates' court. So we had toilets in the old cells. It was kind of really fun repurposing a listed building and extending it. And at the end of my time at Wilkinson, I was like, oh, what am I going to do? You know, so maybe I believe now. And they said, oh, well, we got this project. It's quite large. Would you mind taking over Battersea Power Station? And I was like, okay. So I worked on Battersea Power Station, you know, solely for 2 years of my life, and it's really in a way like working on 40 different projects because it was just so unbelievably complex. But anyway, just wind back a second. About 2005, when I was at Wilkinson, I was able to admit I'm interested in sustainability. I said it quite quietly. And it's okay. It landed, it was okay. And then, because frankly, before then, you would have just been considered very strange. And so then I became the head of sustainability at Wilkinson Air because people were developing heads of sustainability. This was all quite a long time ago, but I think this is quite interesting. So set about doing a lot of work as a head of sustainability. So getting people to benchmark their projects, getting kind of sustainability reviews on projects, getting architects to explain how they heated their building, how they ventilated their building, which, trust me, a lot of architects don't know. And yeah, exactly. And really sort of understanding, it's really focused on operational energy at that point, right? 2005, really embodied carbon hadn't kind of popped up. And it was also quite BREEAM focused as well. You know, that's where we were. But in terms of affecting change, 2 points. So firstly, it's a real pattern in our industry to have heads of sustainability in architectural practices. They are always sitting outside of the board, right? So the board runs a business and then they go, we'll get a head of sustainability. But the head of sustainability sits below the board. They are outside the room, okay? So that's really important because you are not part of the driving force behind a business, which means that your role is knocking on the door. Now, you get quite good at knocking on the door, but it's really important. If you're going to affect real change, you need to be round the table, I think, not knocking on the door. So, and then the other point to make is that, you know, again, you have these lots of failures. I had lots of failures in terms of persuading anyone that sustainability was a good thing. And then I had a hilarious directors meeting. Sorry, men in the room, but they were all men. And it suddenly dawned on me, I was like, they all sat forward like this because I'd benchmarked all their projects. And it was like, it's a competition. And they leant forward and it's like, oh my God, if only I'd realised, if I'd made sustainability a competition from the start, we would have seen a lot more change. And so that's a big lesson in kind of understanding your audience and understanding how to affect change with the situation that you're sort of, you know, you're in. And I think the other point, so this is a napkin sketch, as they used to be called, a Frank Gehry. And so the other really interesting point, I think, that you will also struggle with even now, is most impact can happen on a project in the first 6 weeks. So, you know, how you are going to mass that building, how you're going to orientate it, how big the windows are, all the rest of it. After that point, you're just tinkering. So the really important point is to get in early. So if you're a mechanical engineer or a sustainability consultant, you need to team up with the architects to help them during their competition stages so that they don't do anything absolutely ridiculous, because there's a lot of ridiculous out there. And you need to sort of realise that the early stages where they do their wibbly wobblies on napkins actually quite often gets fixed. And in the old days, it's kind of like, build this, you know, and so, you know, that's quite important. So I then, after Wilkinson, I thought, let's actually get a bit more senior. Let's get round the top table. So I became a director and ran a kind of medium-sized architectural practice, and that, for me, in terms of sustainability, was a massive shift because I was very much in charge of winning the work and running the work, and we did some really interesting things. We also kind of very much embedded sustainability. We did a lot of repurposing of existing buildings. This was Bush House, passive house housing for Tower Hamlets. So the interesting lesson here, pushing passive house forward in a local authority housing environment, right? So how on earth, Well, the only way forward in this instance was to talk about fuel poverty. So the really important bit here is that if you're going to affect change, you'll have to understand the levers and the hooks, right? So for a local authority who's going to retain the building, the fact that Passive House is so rigorously built is really important. So maintenance is very low. And the fact that they've got a lot of families and a lot of individuals in fuel poverty, also really important. The actual carbon credentials, not interested. And I don't mean they're not interested, they are interested, but it's just not a priority. So that's really important to understand what's driving your clients so that you can actually ensure that you kind of, get them to make the right decisions. So then, I'm jumping around a bit date-wise, but okay, now we're at 2018, right? 2018, the IPCC report comes out. Absolute calamitous. If you want a kind of shocking reading, the first absolute shock horror story was the IPCC report of 2018. And that was the first time that it was really laid bare in no messing around that we are in an absolute disaster zone. And it was at that point that a number of architects and people in our industry said, okay, the government's not doing anything, our businesses aren't doing anything, whatever, we are all going to get together and sort this out. So there was an incredible upsurge of activism, really. Architects Declare was born, Letty was born, ACAN, I think, came maybe a year later, but all these incredible groups started up. A few years later, I became a trustee of Architects Declare, and this is all in terms of, again, affecting change. Architects Declare is working at practice level, so trying to get people to change how they operate as a practice and how they design. So initially it was all about providing information, really good information to people. And you'll notice in that period from sort of 2018, I guess, to maybe 2022, something like that, so many guides, a lot of how to do this. There was solutions out there and people needed to understand. But, we also started fully comprehending that sustainability really was simply no way about operational energy. We kind of got over that hurdle. And actually, if you're going to look at architectural practices looking at changing their light bulbs, look at the actual problem, and that's the embodied carbon on your projects. So it's really trying to get people to understand where to spend their efforts, where are they going to have impact.
Sorry, Anna.
Sorry.
Is everybody aware of what embodied carbon means? I mean, is that?
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
I should just. Right, excellent.
So embodied carbon, the carbon associated with the building of the building, so that all the materials, all the systems. And again, it's also this whole, Architects Declare were quite interesting at thinking about the sort of theory of change. So we've done a lot of thinking about this, and they've done some interesting work recently. I'm not so involved with this bit, but they've set out a regenerative architecture index, open to engineers and architects. And this is really all about trying to say what good looks like. It's sort of that perception of what is a good building. So in a way, kind of, if you like, shifting the paradigm, right? And I think that's very important. We had an event the other day on the London Eye, and we had a big party afterwards, all about the circular economy, so all about the kind of reuse of material, all the rest of it. And it occurred to us that having over 400 industry professionals going around the Eye and then coming back for a piss up, actually that's what you need to do. You need to have fun. And in showing all these industry professionals that we're having fun and it's okay, we can still talk about construction waste, is also really important. It's like all these things all these levers you need to pull, but actually having fun and looking cool are quite important, believe it or not. I'm a director and the current chair of Power Up North London. Again, around this time, I was early, 2021, I joined. So again, a very different type of change, a different type of activism, but this is a community energy organisation. And community energy accounts for a very, very small amount of the UK power provision. But significant in that, it's local people rising up and doing stuff. And I think what's interesting, you know, we've got loads of solar panels on public buildings funded by the community for the community. So, for example, on the school buildings, we raise money from the community and pay back interest. It's not altruistic, it's proper business arrangement. They get cheap electricity. We get money for the electricity. And it's a kind of win-win-win. But it takes a lot of energy and a lot of you know, physical energy, mental energy. But gradually we're building up a portfolio of buildings, and we're starting to do some heat decarbonisation work and various things, and also quite a lot of fuel poverty work. So we've got some people helping the local community. You know, if they're in fuel poverty, we've got things like draft proofing, etc., etc. So very much change, but actual change, action, practical help, but from a sort of community level. So then, after 28 years as an architect, I took the step to the dark side. So I moved to Buro Happold, fantastic organisation of over 3,000 engineers, all a global organisation, all located all around the world. Do absolutely every kind of engineering you could possibly imagine, whatever you need. They themselves have some pretty punchy sustainability goals and pledges, and so we signed up to kind of reduce all our embodied carbon and operational energy anyway. So I moved and became essentially a sustainability professional. And I'm just going to give you a very brief, sorry, I know I'm slightly running out of time, very briefly, in terms of what we do, absolutely crazily broad subjects. I mean, it's, you know, it's unbelievable. It's fascinating. We do a lot of kind of standard things like sustainability certification, which you might imagine, BREEAM, etc. But then actually starting to really develop some fantastic parametric tools to help architects and us group issues together. So one of the big things when you're designing to net zero is it really matters where your window sits. And this is a parametric tool that adjusts the design, and straight away you can understand impact on daylighting, thermal, envelope, etc., etc. So it's linking everything together. Very clever guys in our Bath office who do all the kind of computer background. But then I just want to say the other thing is that as we are moving to zero carbon, design is very different. So in the last 30 years of working, architects have far, far, far less freedom now, because in heading to net zero, you cannot have full glazing. You can't have balconies that provide thermal bridges. You know, all these things that we kind of did 20, 30 years ago, you just can't do now. So in a way, we often start off with a kind of rule book. You know, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. And increasingly what we're doing now is at the early stage of the development saying, well, okay, on this site, if you need to achieve embodied carbon target of, say, 450 kilos of CO2, then actually you're not going to do 100% of new basement. I mean, this is just an example, you know, just to try and kind of give you, you know, there are really clear parameters that we can provide at the start of a project, which gives people clues about, you know, how to set out their design. And I think the thing that I'm really interested in at the moment is the circular economy. And increasingly it's becoming harder to demolish buildings and rebuild them. So this is an amazing piece of software that was developed by colleagues in the structural team that looked at how, if you've got an existing building top left and you identify all the steelwork that can be reused and you put it all together and then you form a new building. You know, okay, lovely and simple, but actually that is what we're doing on a number of buildings. We are collecting all the steelwork, we're testing it, blah, blah, blah. And this is what we're going to have to do to get the embodied carbon targets down. So what have we learned about effective change? We always thought, the whole way through my career, always thought we've got the right idea. We thought we had the right solutions. I can look back to all these moments in time where everyone said, yeah, we've got to do this. And CHP, CHP. All those times when, do you know, I don't know how well you know about CHPs. Do they combined heat and power?
Because it's not something we cover so much anymore.
Oh, okay. Well, no, exactly. You don't cover it because it was a stupid idea.
Biomass boilers.
Biomass boilers, brilliant. Biomass boilers, CHP. Everyone said, 20 years ago, this is the way forward. Absolute nonsense, because what we were doing is we were going that far and we weren't thinking sufficiently far forward. Sorry,
could you just explain what CHP is?
Sorry, it's a combined heat and power. You can explain better than me.
Yeah. It's basically an engine. So like if you imagine a diesel engine in a vehicle, the diesel engine runs and produces electricity, and at the same time it produces heat, which in a vehicle you just throw away.
But the problem...
That will allow you to do a bit of generation of electricity and heating in the winter.
So everyone thought, great, we get a bit of electricity, we get a really efficient system, but it was gas driven. So King's Cross put massive CHP systems in, and then 20 years later we're back decarbonising King's Cross because no one thought actually what we need to do is go all electric, which is of course what we're doing now. Fabric first, massively important when heat pumps were so inefficient, and now we're talking about fabric fifth. And we constantly think that we've got the right idea. So the real knack is to really try and think as far forward as you can. What's next? How can you really think what you need to do because we don't have time to mess around with CHPs anymore. We've got to get it right now. And I think what I'd say in relation to that is it's kind of applying more of a systems thinking approach. And you're not just looking at individual issues. It's trying to step out and look much more holistically. We've also definitely learned about the importance of regulation. And that's not just regulation in building terms, but that's also the fact that our investors have to meet certain criteria, which is unbelievably important. I think we've learned that targeted activism works. That's what I think we've done. And as I said before, you've got to find the hook. You've got to find the hook with your clients and your design teams. Get them interested in sustainability, not just because it saves the world. You've got to find what's going to get them going. And I think this is a point. You don't know what's coming. So whether it's heat pumps, decarbonisation, AI, you don't quite know how that path is going to work in the future. So I think the last two slides, I'm just going to sort of really emphasise that you need to step out and think about much bigger issues, as well as we've got to decarbonise the world 100%. But we've also got to look at biodiversity depletion. We've also got to look at, these really, we've actually breached these planetary boundaries already. And so you can't, if you're looking at just making something very low carbon or decarbonising an M&E system, but it's using a chemical or it's using a kind of too much embodied carbon, or maybe there's materials that have come extracted from you've got to zoom out and take the whole story. And so I quite like this diagram. It's an architect's declare diagram. We're still in the sustainability paradigm, where we're still over in the red area. And what that means is we are doing less bad. So, great, we're doing less bad. But how on earth do we get to the point where we are actually doing positive good through our building? No one really is here, other than perhaps people building with mud or with straw or with those kind of, which is all great. But, how do we move? At best, we're here. So I think that, again, it's sort of understanding your part in the whole thing and zooming well out so that we can start shifting across to a regenerative future. That's all I've got to say.
No, well done, thank you, Anna. That was very good. So many, I mean, in 20 or odd minutes you covered so much ground, so I'm sure I'm sure there's lots of questions. Questions, please.
Hiya.
Hi. So you mentioned something about heat decarbonisation. What is that?
Sorry. So heat decarbonisation is essentially what we're looking at, particularly on the community energy. Well, actually, forget the community side, pretty much anywhere, is critically getting rid of fossil fuels. Okay. So the decarbonisation bit is getting gas away. I mean, let's just say it's mainly gas. I mean, you will have oil boilers. We're looking at a building in the middle of London with an oil boiler, but normally it's gas. And so we do not want to be heating our houses and our buildings with gas boilers. So we're going to be electrifying them and we're going to be using heat pumps. Heat pumps, of course, still use energy. Energy comes from the grid, but the grid is decarbonising. So we're shifting the emphasis from fossil fuel use to a decarbonising grid. And the thought is, at the moment, that we can decarbonise our grid because it's a great big battery that we feed in and we store energy and all the rest of it. We've got the ability, we've got the solutions. We simply cannot decarbonise a gas boiler. It is just a gas boiler that's using fossil fuel. So you have to just get rid of the gas and get rid of oil and move on to, of course, massive demand reduction. But that's the critical decarbonisation of kind of heat.
So how does that look financially then?
Okay, so it's quite a relevant topic at the
Very
moment
good
because
question.
the government has just potentially, when's the budget?
26th.
26. So the government is planning to take a really massive grant away from domestic heat pump. At the moment, you can get £7,500, £7,500 grant for a domestic heat pump, and they cost around in a domestic level. They cost around 10, 11 grand, right? A boiler costs around 3 grand. So essentially, what the government was doing was evening, which is great, but they are a lot more expensive. But of course, they are. And the other point is actually when you look at how much they cost to run, because you're switching from very cheap gas to much more expensive electricity. Luckily, the heat pump is very efficient. So actually, you probably won't see much of a difference, but you're not going to see a reduction in cost. You are going to see a massive reduction in carbon.
Right.
So, yeah.
I then go to think of those areas that can't quite afford. You know, I think
Yeah.
the biggest issue
Yeah.
with carbon production is in those more impoverished areas and how we would be able to reach that.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we were working, for example, with schools where they're like, okay, well, yeah, we'd love to get rid of our gas boiler, but there's no way you could just swap out a gas boiler for air source heat pumps because they would they'd be like potentially hit. And so what we tend to do is link a big solar array with the air source heat pump. So at least one's paying for the other, so to speak. But you do need a lot of grants. In that world, you need a lot of grants.
Thank you, Anna, for your talk. I just had a question regarding what your thoughts are about how, so you've mentioned that we need to electrify these buildings, and my first thought is how can we do that? There's not the capacity for that in a lot of places.
Yeah.
There's a lot of strain on the grid.
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, when we're looking, particularly when we're doing the work in a tunnel, we now have to check not its capacity and its quality of the grid. Two things. And in London, we're generally okay, but there are areas where you can't just add generation onto the grid. Particularly, as I understand it, when you've got really large, for example, really large solar arrays, they're waiting years to be able to join the grid, which is just kind of unbelievable. But that's what's happening. So you're absolutely right. There's been 20 years of zero investment in the grid. So it's toppling over, and it's very tricky politically because the government is going to have to put pylons going across the UK, which is unbelievably unpopular, but that is kind of the reality, you know. But because we do need to invest in the grid, because the grid's amazing. So yeah, it's a really, really good point. You've got to check all that.
I also had another question regarding what you said about CHPs. So obviously, from what you said, it seems like they're quite like they're not what we're raising to less at the moment. But I'm doing one of my coursework projects on the Battersea Power Station and its surrounding areas, and they've proposed to build a heat network, a CHP heat network through that area. So I was kind of wondering.
Really?
This is just from my research, so maybe it's from.
That's fascinating. I'd be surprised.
Well, they used to be very
Yeah.
popular.
No, they used to be.
CHP,
I'd be surprised if it's
I mean,
now.
it may be a heat network with an air source heat pump on it. rather
Yeah.
than CHP.
I would be really surprised if it's
Yeah.
CHP. I would say now there would be a heat pump, which could be, heat pumps can use anything, right? It could be water, sewage, ground, air, right? It doesn't matter, kind of, it does matter, but I mean, that's kind of how you do it. But the heat pump is just the way of kind of extracting the heat or whatever.
And,
and
the key importance is that it's electrically powered,
Yes.
whereas a CHP engine is generally
It's
gas
gas. So
powered.
I really
I
hope
hope
that it's.
heat map needs to update it too. So
Maybe so, yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe so.
I hope it's a heat pump that they're going to be using. God. Any other?
Any other questions?
I'm trying to still frame my question yet, but you kind of mentioned how you started looking into sustainability since it wasn't a hot topic yet, and then you kind of mentioned also about how you have to kind of persuade the people to kind of get the hook to let people get engaged into sustainability. What was your approach on letting people getting interested in sustainability? It's kind of like a generic question, but
Oh
the
God.
environment.
Yeah, that's. I mean, so hard. And I think the thing is that it's changed enormously. So, in 2005, it's just like, oh come on, what do you mean we can't have a massive glass window? It was hard. But as I said, we had a few successes, like the directors competing against each other. We did some really fun things, like we all did carbon footprinting within the office, and so we had all these earths, kind of glow, and we had to say how many earths we used, and it's sort of just kind of fun, and I think, again, it depends who you're dealing with, but if you're dealing with egocentric architects, then saying, oh, your key competitor has done, woo, then it's like, oh, okay, oh, have they? So it's just always kind of, you've got to get under the skin of who you're trying to persuade. And of course, it's really, really important to say, which I didn't say, but in the last 12 months, I mean, Trump has been a disaster because everyone was hell-bent, net zero, everything was going fantastic. We were hiring loads of sustainability professions. It was all, our American office now is, can hardly use the word net zero, and all because of one man. And it's very interesting because actually all these investment funds don't need to be listening to Trump, but they've all just dropped their commitments, all like this. And it just shows you it wasn't really there.
Yeah.
They were doing it because of whatever, it was suddenly it became okay to say, actually, we don't really care about net zero anymore. We kind of move away from that. I think the other problem with net zero as well is that everyone made these commitments, like the council says we're going to be net zero by 2030, and university, you look at all the universities, they've all said we're going to be net zero by da-da-da. Absolute rubbish, that none of them are going to be net zero. And in a way, the impossibility of the goal has made it more tricky, actually, because it's so big and so difficult that it's kind of almost easier to give up. Sorry, two in the back.
I was going to have a question about retrofitting. So obviously, trying to in the UK there's obviously a push to trying to retrofit and use brown sites rather than green sites and building from scratch rather than like you trying to use pre-existing application stuff. However, obviously there's then a point where it's like, okay, as for example the UK is getting warmer, there's still an tendency of, okay, well, do we need AC and stuff like that, and obviously we can kind of try and mitigate that through like passive house techniques. But then if you're working with this pre-existing trying to do retrofits on old fabrication and trying to make it passive house, how do you try and almost balance these two sort of sustainable by reuse?
No, it's a good question.
Actually, very good question.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
I think on the first of all, on the existing building point, I don't know how much you've heard of the reuse hierarchy, but it's a really clear sort of methodology for starting your design. So 100% retain the existing structure as the first call. So keep the building. So you've got the building. Generally speaking, depending on which era you're talking about, this is then the tricky bit. So if you're retrofitting a much older building with heavy load-bearing masonry, you're not going to be so worried about air conditioning. It's going to be inherently easier to deal with. You might want to insulate it, you might want to replace windows, but you're not going to have so many problems. We've looked at a number of brutalist structures, including your Institute of Education, in fact, where there was no thermal qualities to those external walls. And that's where it becomes much more tricky, because it's sort of... And then in that instance, we were really carefully weighing a number of options. So it's embodied carbon versus operational energy. And we ended up saving a lot of energy on the IOE building. It was like made big energy reductions, but we didn't go we didn't go as far as we could, because actually the embodied carbon was horrendous. So it's quite interesting balancing act, I think, you've got to do with the existing buildings. And really critically, in terms of what you were talking about going to passive house, you've got to be also careful, because existing buildings can be retrofitted so badly. And so you can bring in, loads of condensation, loads of problems. And so you've got to be gentle with existing buildings. You've got to understand how they operate, how moisture moves through the walls, and not just slap insulation everywhere. It's a much more nuanced design task, I would say.
Yeah.
I'm just going to chime in because my job title is Lecturer of Environmental Performance of Historic Buildings.
There you go.
Yeah, it's you have to pay attention to the details, because you can easily do things wrong. You can introduce.
You can make it worse.
Yeah.
make
You
it
can
worse
actually,
and
yeah.
You can spend a lot of money to make it.
Yeah.
Duration of your building, which is not good. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of people are trying to do things like passive house standards with existing buildings, and it can be done, but you need knowledgeable tradespeople, designers, and et cetera, to execute, and that's often the problem.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is that in the last few years, in relation to the passive house question, decarbonisation of the grid has really gone forward apace, and cost and efficiency of heat pumps, cost comes down, efficiency's gone up. So actually the real kind of pressure on the fabric and the performance of the fabric has reduced. So, again, I think, I'm not saying don't go passive house on an existing building, but you don't necessarily have to. So you can start kind of just being a bit gentler and just balancing all those criteria, which was the point about the fabric first. People get really adamant about that. They get very, very emotional about these issues. God knows why. But, I literally was at a conference recently where I had my head bitten off, because I said, well, actually, you could do fabric first, you could do fabric fifth, but, just take each building as it comes. So, anyway.
You've got the sort of right-hand side of this diagram, so we're generally on the left-hand side.
We're
sort of
over here.
Aiming to be not quite as bad as we were yesterday.
Yes.
Do you think there are any existing systems or any possible future systems of building a building, from construction through to maintenance through to demolition, that could have a positive
Yeah.
overall impact, or are we always stuck in the, well, we'll have to offset it?
I don't think you are. And if you look at the Regenerative Architecture Index, this is what was kind of set up to try and see what's happening and try and showcase. There are a few smaller projects which you could honestly say are regenerative. So all the materials have been reused or bio-based. It's either reused materials or bio-based materials, but you can do an awful lot with bio-based materials. So straw, clay, you know, it's perfectly possible. Timber, I mean, you know. So, and super simple MEP systems, you know. So absolutely, I would say in terms of kind of going out in the middle of London and seeing a regenerative design, you're going to struggle with that. But there are increasingly examples of good smaller projects. I mean, things like there are now kind of straw systems where you can build buildings with incredibly compacted straw, which oddly is 2-hour fire resistance. You know, who would have known? You know, and so these kind of, and they're cheap. It's cheap. It's easy. It's bio-based. It's so it is coming, but it's just how then do you bring? How do you bring a straw panel to the middle of London, for example? I don't mean physically. I mean it's just that whole kind of conceptual thing. So I think it will kick off more on kind of small schools, halls, that sort of thing. But I would say it's massively about the materials that you're using to get to this point, because you've got to have basically zero embodied carbon. So you know that's the real
Are
challenge.
there any examples that you know of where, I know you mentioned, I mean, like proper buildings?
No, I don't. I mean, interesting.
Do you
I don't
actually
think so.
do any work on that in your courses in terms of what the right hand side of the diagram might look like in terms of?
We've been in uni for 2 months.
Ah!
We're doing our best.
Yeah.
Well, you have to get your skates on.
We'll get there.
No, is anybody teaching you that? That's what I meant.
So we have a module which has always had this push more, which has a regenerative in the title.
Yeah.
But I don't know if we're doing enough because you know, universities are slow to change like the construction industry. And
Yeah.
sometimes getting changes to our curriculum takes time,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think we can push more for sure.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, it does. Yeah, I mean, actually, I'm working with an architect, really interesting architect called Kerry Architecture. They're based in, oddly, they're based in Germany, but African kind of descent. And they're really used to using, if they do a lot of work in Africa, of course in Africa it's easier, right? You've got the sunshine the whole time, but maybe it's actually those kinds of designers that we need to look at, you know, reusing, and in a very creative way as well. And a lot of people are using bamboo in very interesting ways. I don't know if you've seen a lot of bamboo structures, but that's also very strong, very, well, obviously bio-based, generative. So it's all those kind of things. So, I mean, kind of less the MEP world, but more the materials and kind of, yeah, I would say.
I think I know the architect that you're talking about. And yeah, I think he just did also like a plan, like a new interface. There's kind of intelligence, artificial intelligence approach. I think.
Oh, really? I don't
yeah,
know.
I think they're going to be launched, but exactly about the sustainable way of thinking.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's the one based in Berlin, I think.
Yeah, they're based in Berlin, yeah.
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 It's
Yeah.
really interesting. I was watching this yesterday, this video. Yeah.
Ah, okay, I'll have to look at that.
Yeah, I have a few questions actually, if I can.
Yes, you can. Yes, please.
Yeah, actually, I think my colleagues were talking about that somehow, but I would like to understand a bit better about what do you think of off-site technologies in the building environment?
Oh, okay, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, well, definitely worth. Okay, so again, it's dependent on what is going on. So if you are thinking, well, off-site because it makes it more efficient, you're using less material, which is quite possible in a kind of off-site environment, right? that's great. But if you're thinking, there are examples that we've worked on where, for example, if we're looking at, say, a hotel, right, you go, okay, we're going to do the off-site toilet pods, we're going to bring the toilet pods on. Well, the toilet pods are going to then stand up. So what you're then doing is you're then duplicating a structure around the toilet pod, as well as having the structure that they sit in on site. So you're doubling up your embodied carbon.
Mm-hmm.
So there are systems where you actually make the embodied carbon a lot worse because of the fact that you're bringing it in as an element. So I think that I think it really depends to what extent you're bringing things in off-site. I really don't think there's I don't know whether you have a thought on that, but I can't imagine there be a rule.
I think in general I would
I'd
suspect
say
it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be careful your pods aren't being made in Peru and
That's the other
Switzerland,
thing.
and
Yeah,
that's the other thing.
For sure.
Or the tiles of the bathroom pod come from Peru and then go to Manchester. And
well, yes, it becomes a complicated.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be more efficient.
on the whole, it's a good thing.
Less construction waste for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have another question. All of those questions are things that I kind of dealt with in the past. So about the maintenance and the electric systems, and also the waste that because it's kind of hard to replace some pieces and kind of things sometimes, and it's like I've already had, not me exactly, but the company that I was working for, a client that he was like so money. I think all the clients are kind of they think about money, of course, in the future, because they had like a traumatized maintenance problem. They were like spending so much in maintenance in the past. So, and we were exploring about these electrical solutions and everything, and I couldn't answer because I didn't know. So I'm asking you. Like,
What electrical systems were you talking about?
About I think in that case it was not that. It was an art gallery, and we were thinking about like transforming the way that it was. Oh my God, I'm sorry.
Ventilated or heated or whatever, or powered.
Exactly.
I think, look, this is what you're asking is such a good question, and it's such a massive question. And so all I'd say is this, right? So I'll give you a couple of examples. All those schools that we looked at, providing, for example, the PV kit for, right? Camden Council, of which we work with a lot, most of their solar panels are not functioning at the moment. I kid you not. And so you're like, because people, once they put them on, there's no instructions left, there's no maintenance regime, there's nothing. And so they literally are not generating any power. I mean, it just makes you completely weep. And that will be all around the country. So that's just a PV example, but it's the same with so many systems. I mean, getting systems to work as they are designed.
Well, the project we worked together on in Oxford.
Yeah,
It was pioneering at a ground source heat pump.
Mm-hmm.
It was £1 million added to the budget. It was an enormous system, and luckily we had a gas boiler and an ground source heat pump in tandem. And there was some problem with one of the inverters on the ground source heat pump, and the maintenance man, who was a lovely guy but had a background in dairy, milking cows. No disrespect to him, very clever guy, but he panicked because something wasn't right, and he turned the ground source heat pump off.
Oh.
And it was off for over a year before anybody realised it should have been turned back on. So, excuse the French, shit happens. I mean, buildings are very, very, very complex.
Yeah.
Not very clever at times.
And sometimes too complex.
And humans get in the way.
I was at this one school I worked at.
That's the norm, not the exception.
Oh, it is honestly the norm.
Yeah.
It's shocking. but so many stories to tell you. But I mean, I won't. I'll tell you one. But you know, there was a school in Bristol, we went back to do a post-occupancy evaluation, which is super important in relation to what you're talking about. But anyway, the caretaker in those days, schools are run by caretakers who had big jingly keys. They didn't know about BMS systems, and he had literally just pulled the cables out of the BMS system because it annoyed him so much. And so it just wasn't functioning because he had no understanding of how to operate it. And so, you know, because he just had no training, and that happens all over the country. Lights are left on Christmas Day. A colleague drove past one of the buildings we finished and said the lights were on Christmas Day. And you're like,
Oh.
but it just happens. So it's so important to at least 1 year, preferably 3, of analysis after the building's complete.
The performance after.
Yeah.
Which isn't always easy to achieve.
No.
Actually. You have to, again, I mean, perhaps I should ask you a question. It's very easy to be downbeat.
Yeah.
Are you optimistic about the future? Are you optimistic about shifting the line from the left to the right?
I am optimistic.
Bearing in mind that these people in the audience are waiting on your
Okay.
answer.
Okay. I think what is really, really great is that we do genuinely have the solutions now. You know, the technology, the materials, the data, the research. We do know what needs to happen. We know we can decarbonise the built environment. We can absolutely do it. So that is like the big, massive tick in the box, isn't it?
Yes.
And so that is the most important thing. And the challenge is how we do it and how we do it quickly enough. And that's,
It's
I
not
think...
point about being effective.
Yeah.
I think we now all know what to do, but for some reason we're not doing it. And that's the collective we in our industry.
Hi, two at the back.
Maybe I'll follow up.
Yeah.
So just maybe my question or comment falls off with what you just said. Yeah, it's not a retrofitting and decarbonization is no longer a technical problem.
No.
You don't need.
It's nothing
No.
to do with
It's really
it's
not.
everything else.
Yeah, it's like I was doing some work with some nonprofits in Canada just before I moved over here, and one of the themes that they were constantly talking about was market transformation.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you're familiar with a group like Anna Woodeson,
Yeah.
they're really like the gold standard for this market transformation, where they're attacking like the supply chain for all these components. Also like training people who can actually execute these retrofits.
Yeah, they're very
It's
interesting.
The holistic approach, and it basically boils down to you have the supply chain issues. You also have the socioeconomic barriers, and you also have the informational barriers for homeowners or building owners. They don't have all the information, whether it's what a retrofit can actually do in terms of it's not just energy, it's also comfort and
Yeah.
insurance.
That's another
Yeah,
hook,
exactly.
actually. I think I
Absolutely.
didn't mention that the other really powerful hook in relation to decarbonisation is comfort.
Yeah.
So that's
But I guess my question is does the term market transformation, like, is it on the tongues of people here in the UK?
Yeah, definitely, and particularly in relation to retrofit. Because,
I
you know...
I absolutely dispute that. I would say
Right.
it's not by a million miles. And
So
that's-
it's not there. It's not there, but people know it has to. Like for example, there's a massive skills shortage in the retrofit industry,
Yeah.
so it has to develop.
Look at the last interesting example of retrofit. You touched on it, providing insulation.
Yeah.
Government-funded thing.
Oh yeah.
Loads and loads of insulation
Yeah.
put in, and most of it is wrong.
Yeah, you're
Most
right.
of it is make the buildings even worse.
Yeah.
You know, it's a lot. Just stay positive.
Yeah, the retrofit. I mean, the retrofit piece is really, really tricky. the funding of it particularly.
My answer to your question is no, and I see that as the only game in town really. That's what, I just can't understand why that isn't happening, but it needs to happen super quickly because 25 years from now we've got to decarbonise 20 plus million buildings in the UK, and I guess we've probably decarbonised less than 1,000, 10,000 maybe, I don't know, I don't even know the number, but it's a huge challenge in 25 years. And I think we'll get there.
We don't have the designers who know how to do it, and we don't have the contractors
we haven't got
that know how to do it. We haven't got,
We don't have a financial system.
No, not yet. Needs to be changed.
Yeah.
But maybe if we, like, as great institutions show the authorities the solutions, like, they will put money in that, like.
Yes, I mean, it'll happen, I think, but it's, it's, as I keep saying, it's, Anna says the same, that, the world you're going to inherit is going to be, it's going to be really rewarding because you will get the planet to net zero carbon by 2050. I'm pretty sure you will. So
Preferably a bit earlier, if that's all right.
A bit earlier, but it would be really complicated. It would be really challenging, and you have to dial up your, you have to be super good at all the sort of little subtle things. Why, as you say,
how you persuade people, and
and also, I mean, one thing I would say that we haven't really. It's very easy to talk about clients as in, they are like a group of people. They're all individual, they're all humans, they're all different. Many of them are never been a client before they've been inherited the role. You've got to see things from their point of view. That's where you've got to get your head into a client's. They're not horrible people. They're not people who deny climate change. They are just constrained by politics, finance, people, deadlines.
The client that we had in Oxford University, this building that we designed, the client was the professor of the Earth Sciences Department. So it will not surprise you that they financed a £1 million ground source energy system because they were really interested in what happened beneath the Earth. And whereas at the same time we were working with Siemens, and of course they were really interested in the tech, all the kind of sticky plasters and the gizmos, and so they were really interested in kind of the all-electric piece. So I suppose it's about that's exactly it, isn't it? You've got to understand where your clients are coming from.
Yeah.
What interests them?
When you say like this kind of sources like geothermal energy, like not just.
Oh, it was a heat pump, but it had boreholes in the ground, so it was So it wasn't drawing water out; it was just putting cold water down and getting warm water.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Sorry, yes.
Maybe an annoying question. We've talked quite a lot about having all the necessary skills or techniques or information to make this transformation, and I was wondering if I could sort of present you with a sort of very annoying binary choice. When it comes to things like AI, there's lots of discussion about whether it can actually help with designing, with integrating it into sort of ventilation and heating systems. To be irritating, would you say that was an opportunity or a distraction in terms of...
Oh God, I've just been discussing AI for the last 24 hours, literally.
I'm so sorry.
No. AI is a humongous and massive opportunity. It is also a massive threat. So it's understanding we're at the beginning and it's going to change all of your working lives in immeasurable ways. But clearly it's going to take over some of the calculating and jobs that are relatively easy. So you might have a situation where it's able to, and if you're able to in a few years, as the architect redesigns a room, the MEP just magically it's all done and tested and la la. You could imagine a scenario where with clever inputs you could make it somehow adjust to your, but you know, you would have to still be the steward of that design, and you'd still have to kind of understand what quality looks like and whether something's right or wrong, or so. But I do think you will have AI doing things that certainly Ian and I didn't have. We hardly even had computers, you know. No, I mean, do you know what I mean? It is just going to completely change your world.
We had a discussion last week when Joe Thornton did his talk, because he is a quantity surveyor. So for those who don't understand what a quantity is, basically a cost manager. So they sit between the client and the designer. So the client wants to build a new building and has a budget of 25 million. The designers will design it, but the quantity surveyor is the person that makes sure it's 25 million and not 26 or 36 or whatever. And he was saying how to be in that profession, you need to know a lot about all the other different disciplines, like the design skills or whatever. And he was worried that his graduates today come in and learn about all those disciplines and do sort of easy things like calculations and whatever that allows you to get the skill set to then be able to say to a designer, actually, you can tell me that that's right, but I know that's wrong.
Mm.
AI is likely to nibble away at all of those jobs that allow you
To learn.
as a graduate to learn to become an effective person. And I think that's the big challenge you will face, is that potentially your employers will be thinking, why do I need so many graduates?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, graduates are what keeps any organisation going. So, and I don't think any industry has yet thought that through.
Absolutely, yeah. I think
Stay positive though.
stay positive, it's all going to be fine.
Stay positive.
To follow that up, do you think AI has a role in past the design and maybe the sort of construction stage? Do you think maybe not AI? What isn't AI is a different question. But sort of very sort of adaptable technological systems, sort of high technology as you were talking about. Do you think they have a generally a really important role to play in building these buildings that might be on the sort of right hand side of the diagram, or do you think as a general rule, more technology does mean higher running costs and embodied carbon, and you've got to get all the sort of rare earth materials from the other side of the world and all of that?
Gosh, good question.
Yeah,
I think,
really good question.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I remember doing a review of a building near where I work, actually. And the developer had got a whole range of buildings all the way across London. And we were going around, and this was the most sustainable building, you know, they thought that they're built. You know, it was just great, all these systems, all this technology. And I said, okay, so just as a matter of interest, how does this compare to a building that I knew that they owned down the road, but it was an old building that was entirely naturally ventilated and no tech at all, right? Oh, he said, no, it's nothing like as energy efficient as that. And I was like, what? And it was a real sort of like wake up moment. Actually, the building that wasn't heated very properly, and the point was that the building down the road that had windows open and whatever, the people in that building accepted a much, much greater temperature range.
Yeah.
You know, they were not, so they were, you know, cold a bit in winter and then very hot in summer, right? But the building didn't use very much, and you know, they probably had the CO2 levels way too high. You know, so the performance wasn't great, but way less carbon. So I think, yeah, it's going to be, that is quite an important distinction. Is it a precision building that's going to have very kind of high performance, you know, your temperature thermostat?
There seems to be sort of two different routes. That
it is a bit.
They're either sort of extremely precision engineered, or they're not that they're not precision engineered, but they're very sort of naturally ventilated.
Passive.
Passive.
Yeah.
There seem to be two very. Sort of
it would be lovely to think that over here you had a bit of the precision and a bit of the tech within a sort of. It is. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
I like your question.
Yeah.
I'm sort of linking some thinking that I've been doing. My slight worry is where I think AI might provide an opportunity for us is that my take on looking back at my career and seeing people who are doing the same thing that I was doing 10 years ago, there's a massive tendency to, and I don't know what it is about the construction industry, but it's very, very, you were saying take a big view. The majority of people in the industry take the absolute opposite about that.
Yeah.
They say, I know what I did yesterday, I just about work out how to do that, and there's somebody over here asking me to think next month. I just want to focus about what I'm doing today, and that will be exactly the same as yesterday. And I think most of our industry is down here. Actually.
There they are. Business as usual.
And in a way, we're all guilty of that, and we all know that it's the wrong thing to do, but that's what we do. And as long as nobody calls each other out, we'll all carry on doing that. So I think that maybe what AI could do is actually make us all wake up and think and show us examples about what that might be. And that might be the trigger, because going back to your thing about is the agenda changing, I don't think it is at the moment, and that's my big worry, is that we keep motoring towards 2050 down here.
Yeah.
I would argue, I mean, it'd be interesting to get your view, but I think the industry that I love to be part of, and you love to be part of, is, if you say that is 100%, I would say 95% of that is focused on new builds. Maybe 90%.
Yeah, interesting.
Maybe even
but
85%.
You're right. Most, particularly interesting in the housing. So the government's got a target of 1.5 million homes. Well, the government is totally thinking those homes are in big green fields on the outskirts of cities, and that's that's insane, because there are so many buildings that need retrofitting and repurposing, but house builders are a very political force. They're very good at lobbying, and so there we are. We've got people who have got the ear of government, who they're not looking at those planetary boundaries, because if you're looking at the planetary boundaries, you would not be building new homes on greenfield sites.
And if you were, you'd have an air source heat pump and solar cells.
Oh yeah, and you'll be building it as straw. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, bite at the back.
Yeah, just on the question of AIs, I think it's important to remember that when we say AI, nowadays we're talking about LLMs. And LLMs are biased.
Yeah.
They're going to be, in our sense, they're going to be biased toward new construction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, as someone who thinks about retrofit of historic buildings, I'm very worried that it's going to give inappropriate advice for existing buildings, right? So you always have to remember that LLMs, it's basically just a copy and paste machine.
Yeah, exactly.
It's going to copy and paste answers from manufacturers' websites, like contractors' websites.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Give you I hazard to say it's not going to be the best advice.
Yeah.
And I'd add to that, you mentioned about it doing quite a lot of sort of calculation. LLMs aren't that great at calculation precisely for that reason. They go off as sort of like a very, very fancy predictive text. It is like a very bad way of describing an LLM, like a large language model. And so they're really not very good at mathematics of any kind.
I hate to tell you, but they will be in 5 years.
Yeah, I mean,
that's the thing. When are you guys graduating?
Yeah.
How many years?
4 years.
Yeah, so at that point, I would imagine AI will be pretty capable. The change is like, so, but I mean, look,
Can I ask on your career? So, inadvertently, not by design, you worked abroad for quite early on, right? As a graduate. Do you think working in those different contexts, different perspectives, helped you become a sustainability head? Do you think opened you up to sort of different ways of thinking earlier on?
Yeah, I don't think it just helped me from a sustainability point of view. I think working abroad and working in different places helps immeasurably. Although, I mean, here is a man who worked in one place his whole career. So I work with a lot of people at Buro Happold who have been at Buro Happold their whole careers. So I'm not saying you have to, I just think that sometimes changes of organisation can be really useful, to just shine a bit of a mirror. But if you do get to work somewhere fantastic, certainly what I'm sure happened to Ian and what happens to everyone at Buro Happold who stayed there 25 years is that their careers can morph and change and, you know, within an organisation.
Yeah.
So I think there's, and of course you can work abroad. A lot of people at Buro Happold go and work abroad and then come back. And so within an organisation you can have all those experiences as well. So I think it, you know.
I think the key thing is to wherever you are, is to stay curious.
Yeah.
And never stop thinking about why is that happening and could I do that better or does that need fixing or.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so 2 weeks ago, you were talking about how post-occupancy evaluation weren't really like practical or not really in use in the industry.
Yeah, it's true.
It's a quite unfuturistic industry, as you said. So yeah, I was happy to learn that you're actually doing post-occupancy evaluation.
Yeah, we are, but Ian's quite right. I mean, the trouble is that a lot of buildings do not require them and do not do them, and lots of reasons, lots of reasons. But there's liability issues, there's all sorts of things. But Neighbours, brilliant. Don't know whether you know about Neighbours, but Neighbours is an amazing energy kind of rating system. They require post-occupancy evaluation. Brianne require post-occupancy evaluation. So we are. It is something that's been pushed from a number of places, but it's still in the minority.
It is
still not.
Unfortunately, very
It's
sad.
still not that every building, every complex building, or every non-resi building has a POE. That's not the case.
I come back to my point about the fact that I'm too busy doing today. I don't want to find out that actually what I'm doing today was wrong.
Yeah.
I'd rather just carry on doing that, which is weird when you think about it. The mentality of that is just bonkers.
And it's also kind of interesting from a business point of view, because the great thing about POE is that you get to stay in touch with your clients.
Yes.
And so you get to stay in touch with your client for like 1, 2, 3 years and actually work with them to fine-tune the building and which means if they have another building coming up or another, you know, you get your mates with it's just stupid not to do it, really, in that sense.
And are like the evaluations effective?
Oh yeah, oh,
Definitely,
100%, yeah.
Yeah.
So, would that not be a selling point for other building managers to encourage maybe POEs?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
So I come back to my Department of Earth Sciences in Oxford, where we discovered, because we were engaged to do a POE, that they turned the ground source heat pump off. So we went straight back to the university, have 240 buildings, very big, saying, great, if you just ask us to do what we've done there to 10 other buildings, which are bigger than Earth Sciences, consume more energy, run 24 hours a day, well, surely you're going to say yes. And they said, well, we'd love to say yes, we haven't got any money. And actually, we're not sure whether we want to know.
And it would have saved, they would have made the money back
Undeniably.
within a few years.
Absolutely right, yeah.
It is properly crazy.
Yeah.
There's another issue here, by the way, that the team in a client organisation that deals with the build, capital project, is different to the team that manages the building afterwards.
Yeah.
And that's quite an important distinction, because you have one relationship ending and often it's hard to then start up the new relationship, which I think is another reason it's harder, perhaps.
Won't that litigation would come in there, because the reason you don't want to know is because if it is messed up, you don't want to know, like, the person who's messed up doesn't
Possibly,
want to
yeah.
Yeah, the whole issue of liability is massive, so a lot of architects don't like to do them. In actual fact, there are PI insurance companies that don't like consultants doing them.
Stupid,
I mean, can you believe it? But that's true. And
they just say PI premiums will go up.
Yeah.
Immediately.
Yeah, you're not insured to do this because
if you indulge in post-occupancy, your company does. Your PIs are priced as high as the ones before.
which is absolutely mad. But yeah.
And also coming back to the point that Joe made and you made as well about understanding money, that the money that pays for the build is a totally different pot from the money that runs the building. So, you know, it doesn't really...
CapEx, OpEx.
Those two aren't linked. You would again think there was some inherent sense in spending more money in CapEx to spend less money in OpEx over a 50-year period. But those two are different pots with different, you know, it's just...
And who's looking for 50 years at that point?
Exactly. Yeah.
Question?
I wanted to ask about, we've talked a lot about the left-hand side of the diagram and thinking about kind of policy and people meeting like a minimum standard. I think lots of what we kind of see is kind of flashy doing the best of the best. So how do you get that to kind of
percolate
down? Because from you
Another
designing
another very good question.
like a UCL student centre, how do you? Yes, that's brilliant, but how do you get that to trickle down in terms of policy and?
Oh, in terms of policy, yeah, it's a good point actually.
As kind of a
policy and best practice in a way, sharing best practice. Yeah.
I think there's a really interesting example of that. How I don't know whether many of you know about the UK Net Zero Building Standards, Net Zero Carbon Building Standard, UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard, that's come out in the last year. That has incredibly high targets, right? Very, very, very onerous targets. And the concern there is that you're looking at a micro number of buildings that could ever achieve that. And so is it helpful? But in a way, it kind of is helpful because all that data will be kept and all that measuring and all that analysis can then become this repository for the rest of the industry. But then there's a lot of people arguing that they should be kind of lowering their requirements in some way so that it's broader and more people can achieve it. But then it's not the standard, you know, the calculated standard it needs to be to meet whatever, you know, net zero requirements. So, yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? But I think you do have to keep those standards quite high and you've got to be constantly learning from people who are doing it. And as I said earlier, and Ian said, we really can do this stuff. It is increasingly possible to be, certainly net zero carbon in operation. That's a term used a lot.
My answer to your question would be a bit more step back a bit. I think culture has a big part to play in that. I think when I was practicing, it was never made a thing of, but I think designers like to keep hold of their designs and be very precious about, you know, almost in a way, my design's great. I don't really want to share it with anybody because I might find out that it's actually not as great as I thought it was. So there was an element of, and architects are very, I mean, if you are, architecture is all about being original, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
If you were an architect trying to make their way in the world, to have not copied but borrowed from another design would be seen as an absolute own goal. So they were all about being unique, one-off, new, boundary
unencumbered
testing. And so all those bits of culture have to change, I think. And I hope they will. I don't know what the driving force will be about that, but to make that happen, rather.
Yeah, absolutely.
I find it interesting you mentioned people are reluctant to share, you know, their successes.
Yeah.
But I think the other problem is people don't share their failures.
Yeah.
Right. You know, why did your design go over budget, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, we repeat the mistakes.
I don't know.
It's a cultural thing again, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very British thing to do, to not share your success.
I think it's a world thing to do.
Well, maybe it is. Yeah, maybe that's true.
There's a brilliant, quite a good platform called Carbon Buzz. I don't know if you've heard of it, but that was set up to as a kind of, again, a repository for all the kind of POE
is that still
results. I think it is, but again, you know, it never
broke
really
through, did it?
It never broke through.
Yeah.
It never broke through. So it was a couple of really brilliant individuals kind of pushing that sharing of knowledge. But yeah, it's not quite.
Did you have a follow-up?
Well, I was going to say, I suppose wider, you sort of touched on it there, but in a lot of building standards, there's a lot of discussion about things being over-designed, like thinking about how many people per square metre of floor you need to account for.
Yeah.
So I was intrigued to ask you what you think in kind of wider building standards policy could change that might help with this kind of agenda, I suppose.
Another very good question.
Yeah, really good question, because there's quite often the case that if you're really looking, a really important concept is longevity, obviously. So you're really wanting your building to last. And God, there are so many buildings that we're now looking to retrofit that were built this century. Yeah, no, really. And so, buildings that have been built a very long time ago, 100 years ago, are proving to be very, very adaptable, right? Because of they've got high ceilings, they've got robust walls, there's all these elements, right? And so there's a really clear case, for example, on some new buildings where you go, well, actually, we are going to use more embodied carbon, bigger floor-to-ceiling heights, more loading capacity, a bit more flexibility in relation to kind of ventilation systems or whatever, more opening windows. That's all more embodied carbon, but ultimately that allows you to, your buildings are going to be much more robust and they're going to last longer. So I think it's really important, again, to look at that balance, because there are too many buildings that are impossible to retrofit because they've been built for this exact requirement of this many people. And I think that's a brilliant quote about kind of all buildings are predictions, all predictions are wrong. And that is just absolutely true, that even buildings that you've finished like 1 or 2 years later, they're changing one room, making it bigger, linking it to another one, which is totally understandable, but we don't ever think like that. We think that somehow it's going to be frozen in time when we produce a building. It's just nonsense. So actually, that balance of spending a bit more carbon, or a bit more kind of thinking into how you adapt the building, which is a massive circular economy principle now. So designing for adaptability, designing for disassembly, designing to take things apart, partitions that come away without messing up the ceiling. These are really important principles. M&E ducts that can just unclip and be used again and set aside. Don't rip the whole ceiling down. This is really important. So, you will become much more familiar with those concepts, I think, certainly in the next few years.
My response to your question is, as an engineer, as an MEP engineer, I think because buildings are complex, and I'll say it again, every building you go in is a one-off. And as you say, Anna, it's designed by a client who has a set of people who give the brief, who very generally don't actually occupy the building. And then, as you say, the occupancy changes all the time. So MEP engineers, well, certainly at Hawley, we used to put a nice fat 15% margin on all the calculations we ever did. And we used to get roundly criticised by architects, by clients, by quantity surveyors, why would you do that? And I think we do that because, we used to do that, we probably still do that, because life is uncertain, as you say, it's about uncertainty. The issue is that we never had an honest discussion with our client. Now, I would say what the industry needs to do, culturally needs to get itself, to sit down with the client and say, look, we can take 15% off everything, but when it's a year that's got a peak summertime temperature which is 4 degrees higher than the average, you're going to get a bit warmer. Are you happy to have that? And maybe you'll get warmer by 2 degrees or whatever. It's about having a consensual discussion with the client to say you can save some money, but there has to be some downside. And I think that would be, that's pretty unusual now, even now. And I think that will become more of the norm.
It will, yeah.
Like you mentioned, trying to understand what they want, so you can frame what is good in a way that it works for someone else.
Yeah.
If you, I do remember at the Blavatnik building in Oxford, the users were, they were wanting to ensure, it was a naturally ventilated building, and then they wanted to make sure that it would operate fine in a 2050 weather file. And this was back in 2016 or something. So we dug out a 2050 weather file, you know, and just because it's a 2050 weather file, that's not the fact. That's not actually what's going to happen. And we redesigned the building so that it could be operational. We put some mechanical ventilation in certain bits. But I was at pains to point out to these clients, you know, at the end of the day, next year could be a super, super, super hot summer. I can't, you know, I can't. You also, can you tell me how many people are going to be in that room every day for the next 40 years? You can't. So there has to be a bit of common sense and give and take. But again, it's about all having that same conversation rather than having a silo approach, which is absolutely writ large in construction, which is, you know, well, I'll just look after the bit that I look after, and, you know, I'll never talk to another silo. But the client is there in their own silo as well, and we need to break down all those silos and have honest, grown-up conversations, and that's pretty rare even now.
Yeah.
Depressingly so.
Yeah.
But stay positive.
So a market that I'm quite interested in is the Japanese housing market and the built environment there. Obviously, housing and infrastructure in Japan is a depreciating asset purely because next earthquake that is going to essentially break your house could be coming in the next 10 years. So there's less of a culture of trying to preserve housing and infrastructure, and it's more about build it quick, let it fall down quick, and build it quick again. How do you try and push for something like, because sustainability is really not great in Japan, like even within the culture, like if you're buying food, everything comes in plastic, and the culture there is kind of, it's not fully good, but it's not in the culture to really.
So do you come from Japan?
I spent some time like living there and doing some work there, but there's been very minimal approach to try and have a sustainable infrastructure system, which yes is understandable in some sense of like, okay, well they have more unpredictable situations, like with earthquakes or with tsunamis and stuff. But then how do you try and make it sustainable, and like, yes, there'll be some kind of circular economy, but is there some way to?
Well, I was just quite interested about the point of like a building that falls down regularly, because I mean,
doesn't, though. We make it structurally stable.
You can engineer a earthquake resistant building.
So much money on that.
But I was just thinking that actually, if you thought about how a building might pull apart, then the whole issue of reusing the component parts and the bits to it, so it's not destroyed. So, for example, the junctions that you design aren't glued. You know, so all these kind of aspects, you kind of understand how it might fail, but it seems a bit risky to do that because you might have people in it, so I'm not quite sure how that works. But I could imagine that you could think about it. The whole concept of the circular economy is that materials are resources and that you never have waste, right? So if you think of it like that, then your house is just a collection of resources, and if that bit falls over, that is still valuable to you because of the way it's been designed and constructed. So I think, but I don't quite know how else to. Yeah, go on.
I would say, like, because I study historic buildings, so in Japan is a unique instance because they value like intangible heritage more than like actual physical heritage. So it's like part of their culture to rebuild temples. Like their historical temples are like 25 years old. They've been built 50 times. So it's probably linked a little bit to, you know, again, just the geography of the area. It's so exposed to natural disasters. But it's interesting.
But if
I'm also like one of those people who thinks like if you build something, you should build it to last forever, right?
But don't forget the carbon associated with a lot of that. So it could be that a lot of, you know, if you're building a temporary building, it's still fine. It can still sit over here because it's built out of bamboo. It's tied together with twine. You know, it's okay, and you can reuse the pieces. That might be better than massive concrete foundations. So it's always, because don't forget when you do your embodied carbon calculations, you're looking at a 60-year period. So you are picking up the fact that actually it might fall down after 25 years, or you actually start to model that in, and you model in your maintenance cycles. So you are seeing a proper picture.
Well, I was going to say, maybe fish it. Like you have two opposite approaches, and this is sort of my perspective. Like, build it and make it last forever, but you also have the opposite end, which is like make it renewable, and you have to rebuild every 20 years. Right?
Yeah, bucket sits over here.
Yeah, so it's like more like that.
Yeah.
And some cultures have built like that.
Do you know about the Marsh Arabs?
No.
If you've seen look up Marsh Arabs. What would you call it? Like gathering halls or whatever. They build the most beautiful buildings out of reeds. And they get rid of them every few years and then they build them again. But they are completely stunning, and they're also quite big as well. It's not like they're large halls, and they're just built out of reeds. But it is a temporary thing. It then kind of.
To do that, you have to have this culture of rebuilding, maintenance, and
knowledge.
UK and Western cultures don't have that anymore.
Exactly.
Come back to culture again. That's
Yeah.
the answer. Yeah. Culture is the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's if you don't choose this, like build it and make it last forever, or the renewable strategy, that's when you get these like throwaway buildings that disappear after 50 years.
I was just curious, do you think in this whole discussion we're having, is there a risk that we're thinking of this from a very Western perspective? Because when you think of this globally, I was thinking back to your example of the Sri Lanka building, how they were moving away from their more regenerative practices to the more Western side of style building. So what are your thoughts on this?
Which building was it? You mean
your first building?
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, they were. Oh god, it's so depressing because they did beautiful traditional buildings. The houses in Sri Lanka are amazing. Yeah, so I was just thinking about. Well, I think so. I'm just going to pick up. There's something really interesting about the way. When you're thinking about, I don't know how much you've learned about embodied environmental impacts, but that's when you're not just looking at embodied carbon, you're looking at the environmental impact of extracting materials. And so in a Western building, what you're quite often finding is that you are essentially depleting the environment of the global south, predominantly, in really quite horrendous ways, actually. And that whole kind of supply chain and understanding where those materials came from is not transparent and is not properly understood. So we're glibly putting all these materials into swanky buildings in London or wherever, not understanding that the devastation that is kind of left in its wake. And, 50% of material use in this country is for the construction industry. And that is extractive virgin material, And so I think, sort of in relation to what you're saying, we've got this incredibly, I guess you could call it perhaps colonial approach to building, where, we're not responsible in thinking about our supply chains from a kind of, well, it's not quite geopolitical, but do you know what I mean? Looking really responsibly about how we are building. We're just going, we'll have that window, we'll have that wall system. But we need to be much more responsible about thinking actually where all this stuff is coming from, because we are causing big problems elsewhere in the world.
Who's the we in that?
Well, the design team, the clients in the UK, but the design team and the clients in the UK would go, we just don't know. Yeah. We've got no idea. We've got no transparency.
I'm just doing what I did yesterday. I'm just ordering big glass windows.
We're just ordering these glass windows. We've just got those wall panels, aren't they beautiful? And we're not asking questions about those wall panels. But interestingly, if you're into retrofit, the piece of legislation which you really need to kind of read and be aware of is Westminster Council's Retrofit First policy, which is just coming through in the next couple of months. Oh my, this is a game-changing piece of legislation, and it's for the first time asking people to report on embodied environmental impacts. unbelievable. But it also kind of feels to me like this legislation is essentially stopping demolition and complete replacement with a new building in the whole of Westminster. Just quite something.
Wow, that is
It's
game changing.
It's absolutely incredible, and that really local authorities are completely leading the way. City of London have got very good retrofit first policy. They're all shifting towards that position, but Westminster has a lot of opposition because people are like, oh well, fine, I'm not going to develop there. I'm going to take my business elsewhere. But we're doing some really, really, really interesting work in Westminster. We've got one building we're jacking up the facades, literally the existing facade. I mean, it's quite incredible, because to keep the material. So, yeah. I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but
It was interesting.
I do think that responsibility thing we're not grabbing hold of in the West.
No.
I'll be honest, really not. And that's
cultural
the
thing,
problem.
isn't it?
Cultural, yeah.
Yeah.
And do you think that will change?
Well, I think if people start talking about embodied environmental impacts, then you've got the transparency. And then you'll be saying to your suppliers, well, could you tell me what happens when you take that stone out of the ground? Where is that coming from? What quarry? And you're starting to really look into it. Embodied carbon, of course, has helped because it's tracked material back. But you're taking embodied carbon figures from the manufacturer. You're not actually asking where stuff has come from. So I think that this is really moving in the right direction, but it feels incredibly important. And you're absolutely right that we are still broadly damaging. The West is still broadly damaging other countries. A bit like that, I would say.
And there's also people involved that are maybe not treated really well.
Oh,
exactly.
yeah. I know,
Absolutely,
child labour,
Yeah.
if you think about
Exactly.
solar
I was about to
panels,
say that.
production, you've got
Yeah.
environmental impact, social impact, all sorts of ethical issues, 100% needs to be looked at in the round.
That should be more like certified in a better way.
Yeah? Yes.
Not for like also European countries, but all over.
I think so, and it just really makes you think, God, the shorter we get our supply chains, the better.
Sorry.
Oh my God, you're halfway through.
Yeah, my pen just fell. Sorry, thank you. Yeah, anyway, I was about just to make the last question, I'm sorry, and to complement what you were saying that I found was really nice, the way that you said that we need to approach the clients and be realistic, but sometimes I just have like a couple of years experience, so I know that I may not have that much experience, but what I saw was that clients like to be fantastic, like they don't like the real condition, like they don't like to face the reality. And then a concurrent arrives and say, oh, this is going to be beautiful, this is in the future, like in 1 year, if you do that, it costs less, and it will be better, and it will be better environmental and everything. And then it's funny because 1 year later it comes back to you and say, oh, now it costs 3 times more than you said.
Yeah.
And at the time he said it cost the half. So it's just like
There is some of that.
There are clients and there are clients, aren't there? I mean, yeah. Something you do, honestly, I'm working with a client at the moment who's just completely awe-inspiring. And you do get some clients that are absolutely wanting to push the agenda. So it's exciting, but they're not always the case.
Yeah, no, I understand. Like, it's just because also it depends. When you are in a big company and you are facing big clients, is that one thing, I think. And when you are dealing with middle clients, just like the experience that I had, maybe they are more like money driven instead of looking at the whole process. Just
Yeah.
feeling that
On the whole, I would say clients are nice,
Yeah.
ordinary, sensible people.
Yeah.
And The problem is that there's not enough good ones.
Yeah.
I think that
And it's
unfortunately,
knowledgeable maybe
the
as
vast
well.
majority of clients are not good enough.
Yeah.
When you get some good ones, it is a joy.
Yeah, no, it is.
Because suddenly it all clicks and
Yeah.
everything's fine.
Yeah, sorry, and I moved from the question, but basically, a few years ago I had the chance to be in the lead when they launched the heritage category. In Italy, they launched I think it was 2018, and where they transformed monuments into sustainable buildings, because there's a huge problem in Europe.
Mhm.
Like we have all of our centers, they're kind of, especially in Italy, almost half of the buildings are heritage and protective. So how can we transform these buildings into sustainable buildings without changing facades, without changing nothing, without touching anything? So I was wondering, how is this approach here in the UK since I just arrived?
In London, I think 50% of the buildings are in conservation areas, and there are an absolutely massive number of listed buildings, right? So there is absolutely a heritage context in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
But things are changing. Historic England are moving in the right direction.
Okay.
They used to be a very conservative organisation, but things are genuinely changing. They've got new guidance out. If you look at HEAN 18, which is guidance from Historic England in relation to retrofit of existing buildings, you can see that they are talking about awnings, heat pumps, new windows,
Double glazing.
all this, which they would never have done 10 years ago.
No.
So things are moving, but I'm not saying it's easy, but they are moving in the right direction. The other thing that's interesting, we had a meeting with Historic England the other day actually, and they were very interesting because they were saying, well, they finally realised as an organisation that a number of their buildings are just going to get lost. And so they're applying a kind of climate resilience approach, which we haven't talked about, climate resilience. But, it's quite interesting that an organisation is finally waking up to the fact that actually, that castle on the coast isn't going to be here. So don't spend loads of money on that castle on the coast because it's not going to be here in 20 years' time. Yeah. But concentrate money. So they are genuinely getting better at, understanding things.
Historic environment Scotland has traditionally been about a decade ahead of historic in terms of this, so they publish a lot of good stuff as well.
Right, that's so interesting to know.
Yeah, it's the way to go though.
Last question? Oh, two last questions?
Just a very general question. In our first jobs as graduates, obviously we'll be learning how to do our jobs. At what point in our careers do you think we'll be able to start making changes like this?
Oh God, immediately.
Do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we're talking about. Is it sort of getting you know?
I mean, I don't know whether you came to my talk, but it was all about what this whole series is trying to make you understand that the sooner you find your voice, find your self-confidence, the better. Now, clearly, that's probably not on day one of your job.
No. Yeah, going to the client meeting going, excuse me.
Maybe in the afternoon. What I mean is, you should try and take some control of that and try and make that evolve to your agenda and not necessarily to your employer's agenda, who isn't probably a nasty person that wants to keep you doing menial tasks forever, but they're probably concentrating on other things as well as your development. You're the person who should focus on that. And